Did you, with all the guests you have, ever have guests who were somewhat confrontational with you?
Oh, of course. Many, many times. The first and certainly the most
I'm sorry,
dramatic.
I'm going to interrupt you just because
I have to repeat the question.
Right.
Well, over the years of the Donahue program, I have been booed by my own audience. I have been scolded and lashed at by guests. The first experience came, and I certainly can't claim to have been surprised by this because this is the kind of fellow he was. Jerry Rubin was one of the Chicago Seven. You'll remember the radicals in 1968 who disrupted the city at the Democratic Convention were subsequently put on trial in Chicago. William Kunstler, who was to become a Donahue Show guest later, was their attorney. And the defendants included Jerry Rubin, Abby Hoffman, and David Dellinger, and others. So Jerry Rubin comes on the Donahue Show with his tie-dye T-shirt and a book he wrote, which is titled Steal This Book. And I think I'm halfway through my question. And he says, you say ah a lot. You're always saying ah. Have you got an anal problem? Now, we are like 30 seconds into the show here. And I kept going. And he's saying things like, why should I have to listen to this? You're a plastic man in a plastic suit. You're phony. This is the uniform of what's wrong with America. And then it just, whoa, just blew me. But, oh, you couldn't not watch it. It was riveting. The radical, again, and I looked just like I had my tie and my shirt. We finished the program, an hour of this, and it was supposed to be sent out now for syndication, and they didn't want to. The general manager didn't want to. I said, come on. I mean, the egg is on my face. Don't worry about it. Send it out. This is real. I had to beg him to air the program.
But it was live local.
It was live local. And then later on that afternoon, it was supposed to air in Cincinnati. And Cincinnati was the flagship station, as we used to call the main headquarters of the Avco group. And, you know, they were doing variety, just like the show I replaced, very successfully. I'm not making fun of this at all. Variety, a hugely successful program in Cincinnati, featuring a woman by the name of Ruth Lyons, who was like a female Arthur Godfrey. She was just wonderful. You had to stand in line to become a sponsor on her program. And others like Bob Braun and Paul Dixon. Cincinnati was the flagship of the Powell Crosley Avco station group, and they had to do local live. And so they're all waving and singing and doing funny things and having a wonderful time. And Donahue is on the air in Dayton with an atheist or a homosexual, and letters are being written to the general manager of the big station in Cincinnati saying, do you realize what's happening? You know, somehow a palace guard has overthrown your station, and they got this person who doesn't believe in God. You got to get rid of him. So we were getting pressure from there. And I think, too, it's important to remember that at the time we signed on the air in 1967, daytime television was game shows. Come on down, even in 1967. Monty Hall would give away $5,000 to a woman dressed like a chicken salad sandwich on Let's Make a Deal. Merv Griffin and Mike Douglas, song and dance and happy and interviews and so on. I don't want to diminish it. They did a wonderful program, and they often had serious topics. I think I owe it to Mike and Merv to make it clear that I saw them, that they did some very serious work. But it was essentially, and they're not ashamed of this, and they shouldn't be, it was essentially an amusing entertainment program. And along comes this thing called the Donahue Show, the Phil Donahue Show. And we were talking about things that had never been discussed on the air. We were talking about the things women were talking about among themselves. When all the men on Saturday night would go into the kitchen to mix their drinks, the women would gather in the living room, and what they were talking about are issues that the Donahue people brought to television. I'm very proud of that.
Obviously, in 1967, the Phil Donahue show was groundbreaking television. But you must have had there must have been others in the media who you looked up to and who had an influence on you. You know, you speak with great respect of Mike Douglas and Merv Griffin at the time.
Yes,
But
yes.
who else? Who was at the time that you looked up to?
I've always had an affection and an admiration for Mike Wallace. I watch everything he does. I remember when we first had him on the show, what a thrill to have this guy, this 20th century legend.
What about people who influenced you in your career? Do you remember any?
I watched, for a long time I didn't know what I did. I didn't sing. I wasn't a ventriloquist. What do I do? Interview people? There's no Emmy for interviewing people. The best interviewer, so, you know, it wasn't really altogether that defined a professional activity, interviewing, in 1967. We hadn't come to the realization that one of the things electronic journalism is going to demand of certain people is somehow extract information in a reasonable amount of time to whoever you happen to have on camera at the moment. That was a very new idea, and it's interesting that there was no category about that. So I have to be honest and say that my memory of the time was of being enormously impressed with the power of network news people. I wasn't studying people to learn how to interview. I didn't think of myself as an interviewer. As I say, I wasn't sure what I did. So I wasn't homing in and say, I'm going to copy that. Or Bob Kennedy, I did want to copy the Westinghouse two-way call-in radio format. I thought that was fabulous. I loved it. Real people, real issues. Some people talked too much, some people didn't talk enough, to be sure. But along the way, somehow I learned a little about moving the thing along and trying to encourage people to get to their point without being obnoxious and rude about it. But at the time, I certainly watched Cronkite every night. After all, I grew up in a CBS affiliate in Dayton, and then moved over to NBC, Channel 2 in Dayton. Huntley Brinkley came and did the program. I was standing, Paul Duke, I can remember, came in, and they were very impressed with the show. First of all, they're on for an hour. They're not sitting next to a comic who wants to tell funny stories. The focus is totally on them. I mean, it was an ego trip to be asked to be on the Donahue show, especially in those early days. As the program progressed, the demands or the pressure to feature more and more people on the program became greater because of the feeling that the audience had a very short attention span. You know, I used to tell a joke that is only a little funny. I'd say, you know, if I found Hitler today, I'd have to put him on with dictators of small countries, you know, in the front row. You know, they wouldn't watch one face for an hour. That's the mindset. You know, maybe they're right. I'm not sure. In the age of MTV and all the things that have happened to us, this is a very quick cut now generation and medium. Things have to move rapidly, or else we lose viewers. That is the book, in any event, that they're trying to follow now.
Let's talk briefly, anyway, at least about some of the many guests you have had. But starting with what you were saying to me earlier when the camera wasn't rolling about why is it so difficult for you to answer the question when so many people say, who are some of the most memorable, and why is it the case? Where is it because of the large numbers of people?
Well, the worst thing someone can say to me, and it happens to me all the time, if a person sits down to me next to me on an airplane, who is your best guess? Who surprised you the most? 29 years, 6,000 shows, more than 6,000 shows. And incidentally, I think I'm Cal Ripken. Cal Ripken played in more consecutive baseball games than Lou Gehrig. He set the record, the modern record, for the number of games played consecutively. Well, I'm certainly hardly humble to say, and pardon my vanity, I don't know anybody who's done 29 years, 5 days a week, 5 days a week, hosting a show all alone. And if it sounds like I'm bragging, I am. So when somebody says to me, who was your best, who was your worst, first of all, I'm afraid of embarrassing the person that I may be tempted to identify. You know, if I say somebody, this is the best guest I ever had, you know, I don't know, the guest may be dead, the guest may be alive, it's my memory. And honestly, I never looked at it. It was all, there were some guests that were bad, very poor, but the program turned out to be fabulous because the audience saved it. There are some wonderful guests that I thought maybe I wasn't as good as I should have been. There's so many variables. The topic, how many people are in the audience, how many people want to get in, all those things. So I am loath to reveal my top 10 worst, best, most, surprise. I hate those questions, those superlative questions. They're very easy questions to ask. They long for an exciting answer, and I've always been hesitant to even try to provide one. Sorry.
Let's go. Well, I want to ask that question. Let's go. Let's go through some of the specific guests and just sort of brief recollections of them, and also giving the context of the time period. Gloria Steinem.
Gloria Steinem came into my life when she was 34 years old. First of all, she was breathtakingly beautiful. I just was really quite taken by how fabulous she looked. And then I began to hear the message. And I began to appreciate the virtue of this movement. And the women's movement was gathering tremendous focus, tremendous head of steam. And it was happening against the pressure of a hostile white male press that thought these girls, all they wanted to do was burn their bras. An awful lot of abuse was heaped on these women. They don't like sex, they don't like men, they don't like love. Who are they anyway? Oh, women, often the worst critics. And Gloria just kept on keeping on. And as I watched her over the years, I saw her in personal appearances, spend hour and a half with young women students who would come up to talk to her after her lecture. I saw the personal attention she was giving. I saw the movement begin to wane. I saw the empty chairs. And I saw Gloria still out there. I mean, I came to the conclusion during the days of demonstrating, or when I began, the scales were falling from my eyes in the 60s, when I realized my country, all the wars my country fought weren't necessarily good ideas, and that we were a racist nation, and that there was such a thing as homophobia. All these things were occurring to me, and I began to look at myself, and I decided there were 4 phases to this kind of political epiphany. The first phase is the fun phase. We marched. We shall overcome. And it was moving. And remember, I was covering riots and demonstrations. And to be in the company of black people was itself exciting. To have people over to your house, to scare the neighbors who thought you were going to sell your house to a black person, to see the terror and the fear. But we were out there and we were meeting new people, and we weren't just Catholics who were kneeling down and praying. We were standing up and doing. It was fun. Enter the second stage. The second stage is the angry stage. Everybody's a bigot but you. I mean, you couldn't talk to anybody. Everybody else was a bigot except you. They didn't get it, they didn't understand it, and you turned people off. We went through that phase. The third stage is where the saints are made. The third stage is a sudden, overwhelming recognition of the enormity of the problem. I figured you demonstrate. You work hard for the least of his brethren. You help people pull themselves up. We'll live in an integrated society, and we'll die a happy death. Honestly, this is how naive we were in those times. And then as you got into it, you began to examine yourself. I remember I was on the board of a center in the black neighborhood of Dayton, on the board. And we needed furniture. And I said, well, why don't we call Goodwill? And the black people said, hell, we give stuff to Goodwill. You see, I was patronizing there. I began to realize that the white guys did all the talking. I saw it, and I looked at myself. So after the angry phase, and after the sudden realization of how complex this is, it is the Rock of Gibraltar, and you are a feather. That's where the saints are made. You go either one of two ways at that point. And many, many folks dropped out, take guitar lessons, yoga, maybe even live in a Volkswagen in New Mexico somewhere. Just total burnout. Too many demonstrations, too many cops, too much yelling. Or, even though you know how complicated this is, even though you know you're never really going to see any particular significant nationwide victories here, you keep going anyway. You keep on keeping on. That's where the saints are made. I would count Gloria Steinem in that. Ben Spock, pediatrician from Cleveland, who would proudly get in that paddy wagon, and they'd haul him off to jail, and he'd go in there with his shirt and his tie, with a toilet that didn't work, sticking out of his cell wall. Ben Spock, millionaire. Dick Gregory kept on keeping on. Ralph Nader certainly knows how enormously complicated all the issues that he challenged. He keeps going anyway. I admire these people so much. They're the people who make the difference. Anybody can march and have fun and sing and drop out, but to keep going after the cameras are gone, after the newspapers have left, when it's no longer on the front page, when it's maybe a minor issue. The people who continue to speak to all those minor issues, and the big ones too, are my nominees for sainthood. And in my next life, when I am asked to approve sainthood for these folks, I'm going to vote yes.
Let's talk about some of the other guest appearances on your show. Joe Frazier. And also, if this is in context with the penitentiary week of interviews you did.
We felt that the reason we had Attica is because the riot at Attica State Prison in New York State is because things fester behind prison walls. We need the disinfectant of the First Amendment light that television and newspapers can give. Nobody should be locked up behind a building without somebody else looking them over and seeing. And we wanted to get in Ohio's penitentiary. and no governor would ever let us in. The governor and the warden were able to say, nah, it's too dangerous, and nobody went. Finally, Governor John Gilligan of Ohio said, sure, go ahead. We did a week of shows from the maximum security institution called the Ohio State Penitentiary, which at the time was in Columbus, in a building about 150 years old, in downtown Columbus.
When?
This was 1972 or 3. It's in that neighborhood, early 70s. And one of the guests we had was Joe Frazier, who had just beaten Ali. And I remember the first guy, and we had lifers in the audience. We did it from the chapel. And that was, the warden said, now you're dealing here with 1,500 of the most aggressive sons of bitches in the state of Ohio. I hope you know that, Mr. Donahue. And I said, why are you telling me this? He said, well, we're not going to make any moves unless somebody puts a shiv in your back. I said, what's a shiv? He said, those are little that they make in the shop here illegally, some of our prisoners. And I think to myself, I have 5 children. What am I trying to prove here? But anyway, we continued. We went with it. We featured B.B. King. And here I am again, once again surrounded by a largely, not exclusively to be sure, but this is a black urban population in this prison. And I'm sitting in church with them.
Did they participate in the questions?
Yes,
Your
they would.
normal
Yeah,
audience?
they would stand up and ask questions. Joe Frazier, I felt terrific. First of all, introducing B.B. King inside a state prison, they went nuts. And I had only a little knowledge about the blues. And B.B. would get that Lucille guitar, and he sang, we shouldn't be surprised that the white kid from Cleveland can't remember the name of this song, but it's, he's talking to his girlfriend, or his wife probably. He says, you tell that postman, wah, 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 wah. And I'm sitting there like this, surrounded by 1,500 of the most aggressive sons of bitches in the state of Ohio. You tell that postman, he better ring more than twice. Yeah, these guys, yeah. They say, I don't know if it's true, but everybody in there has a woman somehow figured in whatever it is that, The second one is, you tell that milkman, you don't need to make any more deliveries. Yeah! They're like this. And the finish, the last line is, B.B. King is there. And these guys are now moving. I mean, I can feel it. And he says, and you tell that insurance man, he better take out a policy on his life. And 1,500 guys stand up like this, and they're screaming at the top of their lungs. And I'm trying to figure out what I'm doing here and what is going on. I mean, once again, this thing called my talk show gets me in a place that I could never have dreamed of being a part of. It was, I'll never forget it. I'll never, guys, and incidentally, no shivs. They're passing me notes. Check C block. Go see C block. C block. Mm-hmm. Somebody's in, I don't know, lockdown. In other words, they're trying to get me to, you don't know what's going on here, man. You come, I'll show you. Guys giving me notes for their mothers to pass, a whole week, 1 whole week inside that penitentiary, including the death house. We did a piece on the electric chair and interviewed a reporter who had seen an execution. Well, the victim lurches forward, and then his fingers curl up, and you can hear the sounds like bacon frying. I'm holding this, we see the chair. So, we had, and Joe Frazier was bringing in. First question, you the new great white hope? Frazier says, I'm waiting for you, man. Let me tell you about me. And he stood up for himself. He was being accused of being the white guy's candidate against Ali, who, as you know, at that time and forever, was probably the most popular figure in all of black America, and made more so by the fact that he became a political figure of the 20th century. I mean, what's courage to you? Renounced his championship status because he refused to fight in the Vietnam War. You know, a black guy who raised my consciousness. A woman stood up when he was on my show, and she said, "You're always throwing your blackness at me. Stop throwing your blackness. What, you're always throwing," he said, "you're always throwing your whiteness at me. I know a lot of Miss Americas that are black. They're a lot prettier than the white Miss Americas. And how come you call devil's food cake, black cake, devil's food cake, and white cake is angel food cake?" And, you know, he's doing, and he was, you know, some of these folks were rural, and he's blowing them back on their seats. A black male who was a loudmouth and right in just about everything he was saying. You know, that the Vietnam War was a racist war that he refused to take part in. That this is a racist society, that cops are stopping you because you're driving while black. All the things that he was blowing the whistle on. I mean, and he's a world figure. They knew who Muhammad Ali was in the darkest days of the closed Soviet Union. They don't know who Joe DiMaggio is. They know who Ali was. And he came on in 1 hour. 1 hour. I mean, that's you know, I mean, at the end of it, it's a natural high, goes for me, to do a show like that.
When was it you did your shows with the Soviet Union?
We went to the Soviet Union in 1987, 88, something like that.
Much later.
We did our first space bridge. Vladimir Posner and I did our first space bridge in December of 1985. Gorbachev came to power in April. And that fall, someone came to me and said, "Would you like to do a people-to-people satellite meeting? The people of the Soviet Union meet the people of the United States." I said, "Can I say anything I want?" He said, "Yes." I said, "If I say something they don't like, they'll take it out." He said, "No, they won't." I said, "Are you guaranteeing me that everything that we say is it's not going to be edited by the Kremlin?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Who's going to be on the other side?" He said, "A guy by the name of Vladimir Posner." Who is this Posner? So I find out he's been on Nightline. So I called Ted Koppel. I said, "What do you think of this guy Posner?" He says, "I like him. I think he's a good guy." That helped a lot. So I chose to take part in the first everything goes. You don't have to worry about what you're saying. Even in the Soviet Union, Gorbachev is now their leader. It's a new world. Glasnost became a word. And openness. And we taped our first show 3 hours long from Seattle. I didn't want to do Washington, and I didn't want to do Moscow. I wanted to do just cities. I didn't want to do, so we did Seattle to Leningrad. It was then Leningrad. And simultaneous interpretation. Good evening. And it's like walking in bubble gum. I don't know how we haven't blown up the world with, you know, simultaneous. I mean, it is. Good evening. I'm very pleased that I should be teaching you. And it's in your back. It's hard to. I said to them, 500 Muscovites or Leningrad folk in the studio, and I said, "If you could come to the United States, where would you like to visit?" Hands went up all over. I ran over. Disneyland. Las Vegas. Oxford, Mississippi. I said, "Why?" He said, "Because that is the home of your great author, William Faulkner." And I wondered, how many Americans know that? They were much more interested in us than the American community was interested in them. A fact.